I always like to go with my dad to visit his aunt, Margreta Falla. We called her Margreta in Norwegian. And she was a Norwegian immigrant that came to America in what I can't remember the year right offhand. Probably in the
1870s or something.
Well, it would be before 1870 because they came to Fillmore. They came here in 1875.
Oh.
And then they lived in Fillmore County for a few years. So, well, probably around between 1850 and 1860, something like 65, something like that, when they came to America, somewhere in that era. And she also was a good storyteller, and she was a very nice lady, and she was good humored. She liked to tell jokes and laugh. And we'd go and visit her, and they'd drink coffee, and get her to start telling about her trip to Norway, or to America. So, before they left Norway, they had to pack food, and I think probably a lot of flatbread and other food that would keep for a long period, because they'd be on a ship for about a month, and they had enough food to last for a month. So I imagine flatbread was pretty good, and they probably have other dry things that could cook too. And she was telling us when they're on a ship that sometimes they'd have dances on the ship where for entertainment, they'd get together and have a party or something to pass the time. And then she always said when they first came out to Chippewa in Minnesota, and when they came from Fillmore County in southeastern part of the Minnesota, there was all hills and woods and looked much like Norway, many streams. And so when they came out here on the prairie, and I remember what she used to talk about is when you looked out over the prairie, the tall prairie grass looked like the ocean. When the wind blew, the grass would be waving, and as far as you could see, there'd be the tall prairie grass, probably as tall as a person, just waving, waves of as far as they could see, it was waving. And there was no trees in that area at the time. So any wood they'd need for building or whatever they needed wood for, they'd have to go down to the river, because the trees grew down along the river, like cottonwoods and box elders and whatever other kind of tree grew in those days. And they would start out building a sod hut. They cut the sod, build the sod, and then when they were able to, they probably got a plow as soon as they could, and they would plow an area around their house, because they were afraid of grass fires. So if lightning would hit someplace, and that tall grass would catch fire, and if you had a wind, it would just move real fast. And so first of all, they would try to cut so much of that grass away from where their sod hut was. And then as soon as they could, they would plow like a fire break around it, so in case it got started, they would have some protection. And they also used that grass for, instead of firewood. They twist it and tie it together in tight bundles, and pile it, and that would made good, because it was quite coarse grass. And that was one thing they used for them. And I think to me, I remember they said they used buffalo chips, dried buffalo chips too.
Mm-hmm.
They would gather them up on the prairie and stack them by their house.
Mm-hmm.
And they would burn that in the wintertime. Made good firewood. I don't know how it smelled when they burned it, but anyway, it was heat, and then for cooking. And I think I remember they would bring their cook stove along in the covered wagon when they came from Fillmore County, and they would stop at night, and they would just cook put the stove right in the wagon. And
so these are the
they
kind
would
of
sleep. That wagon was their home for that time. They would sleep in there, and I can just imagine sometimes when the weather was bad, like raining and that, you can imagine how difficult the life would be to travel that far with the covered wagon and the oxen and horses.
So Margreta, she was probably getting pretty old then.
Well, this would be in probably around early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, you remember?
My dad was born in
89.
In 89, and my grandpa Jens, which was Margreta's brother, he was born in
55.
55. So by 1930, Margreta was probably born around. They weren't too far apart in age, so say around 1850. That would make her about
70, 75.
Yeah, 75 years old. So that's about the age, I guess. And so I always liked to go over there because she was fun to listen to, and then she was good humored, and they could laugh and joke and drink coffee, and they always had.
Well, so why didn't you go outside and play?
Well, I always liked to listen to some of these people telling their stories, so probably we'd stick around in there to learn something. And you always had plenty of time to play, but the time you spent with an immigrant from Norway and their travels on a ship, on a sail ship, and a covered wagon with oxen and horses, that's quite unique. There wasn't too many people in history that had that experience.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we used our imagination too, what it would be like on a sail ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and then to make their way to Minnesota and start building right out on the prairie without anything. And that was my dad's aunt and my grandpa Jens's sister. So between Jens and Margreta, I guess in English it would be Margaret, but Norwegian was Margreta. And then their brother Stephen Abrahamson